Hi, this is Charles Hoskinson broadcasting live from warm, sunny Colorado. Always warm, always sunny, sometimes Colorado. Today is February 21st, 2025. Making a video to talk about something I get asked all the time by many, many different people. So many people have come to me and said, Charles, can we use blockchain for the American election system to make the American election system far more secure? And the answer is maybe. So, first off, let me share a little something with you, written by some very famous academics. It's a paper I disagree with, and I actually happen to think it's a deeply unfair paper. But, sometimes you have to submit yourself to open criticism. And the authors are very famous. Neha Narula is part of MIT's Digital Currency Initiative. But the one everybody recognizes is Ron Revest from RSA, the R in RSA, the Turing Award winner, going from bad to worse, from internet voting to blockchain voting. And the paper details a lot of challenges about blockchain systems, and their conclusion is pretty stark. They basically say blockchains don't do anything to improve a system. Blockchain technology does not solve the fundamental security problems suffered by all electronic voting systems. Electronic online blockchain-based voting systems are more vulnerable to serious failures than paper-based systems. Adding new technologies to systems may create new potentials for attack. And of course, they receive some funding from MIT to go ahead and do this. And I disagree with this paper because I think they were being a bit unfair about the reality of where the world is moving. So people have tried to construct blockchain-based voting systems. In fact, this is an example of one called Votes. And what they did is they created a hybrid system, and I think this is the way to do it. So let me show you a little something about their technology. So our approach, they combine end-to-end encryption, paper trail and secure digital receipts, blockchain storage, biometric verification, risk audits, and they have a data security play. So you have a paper ballot combined with blockchain data and a ballot receipt. So you'll see here that to build a system like this, there's a collection of components that have to work together. And let's talk about that. So the first thing is that you have to have a really good identity system. So blockchain voting or voting in general. So a lot of people come to me and say, how about we do a blockchain voting system for a state? Will you bid on it? And I've had numerous states come to me and talk about it. And the first answer is no, unless we're also talking about the identity system. So typically, how nation states identify people is through an artifact called breeder documents. And breeder documents are things like driver's licenses. These can be passports. These can be birth certificates. There's all kinds of various things that you can come up with to identify a person. But typically, they're government issued and they have some notion of tamper resistance and some notion of ability to verify. So you'll have an ID, and that ID is going to have maybe a little hologram on it and a watermark and your picture on it and these types of things. Voter ID, people say. All right. Well, the security of your entire voting system first relies upon the security of your identity system. These are not terribly secure. These are insecure, unfortunately. Many ways to counterfeit them, many ways to tamper with them, many ways to manipulate things. And there's not even a very good audit log in the government systems that exist. So, breeder documents are notoriously unreliable. And in many cases, forged documents can even be made by a government entity itself, especially abroad. So, your identity system is the very first component that has to change before you even begin to talk about voting. Number one, identity. So, we have standards like the DID standard, and we have things like a non creds. And let me show you this real quickly. Non-creds in the DID system, they come from the W3C, and these are open standards. I'm right here. So here's the decentralized identifier DID v1 standard, and it's a way to represent identity. It's been around for 10 years. People work on it. The non-creds are a way to represent identity where you can prove properties of somebody without revealing the underlying information. Like, for example, you can prove you're at or over the age of 21 without revealing your actual age, your name, or any other thing. Just this person has this property. Super, super cool idea. And the Anoncreds Working Group has been working at this since 2017. And there's now the second version of the standard. And Hyperledger Dentist actually supports this. Okay, so we have some notion of how to do secure identity. Now, are we done? No, not even close. That's just the entry point to all of this. So, first, you need secure identity. And then, second, you need secure registration. So, the people who are registering you to vote for whatever that process is, either it's real time or it takes some time, they have to be able to understand the identity system in a way that no one is fake. The reason being is that if you can have a super secure voting system, which is completely unforgeable, meaning the tallies are completely accurate, that no one can manipulate your ballot and change your ballot or introduce counterfeit ballots. But what if you're registering dead people? Or what if you're registering fake people? So a strong identity system is pretty good, but then you also need things like proof of life, for example. You also need things, for example, like proof of location. Okay, so proof of life, proof of location. Why? Because let's say you registered in the vote in the state of Colorado, but you actually live in Wyoming or California or somewhere else, and you just never updated on their voter registration. So there's a temporal component to these types of things. Uh, Proof of good standing. What do I mean by that? Proof of good standing is, are you a felon? Are you eligible to vote? Are you over some criteria? So there's criteria for voting that exist. So secure registration means that there's a process where they're watching and nothing bad can get through. Okay. Then for a secure voting system, you need a secure and fair ballot. So after you get your people, you register your people, you need a ballot which can't be forged, and candidates cannot be omitted from it who are legitimate, ideally. Okay. So you need that property. So you'll hear things, for example, getting on the ballot. Robert Kennedy had that issue. And then this idea of fake ballots or other such things. So paper ballots being injected into the system. So they have to be forge proof, they have to be untamperable, have some wonderful property about it. Okay. So then finally, after you have all of those, the person voting, the registered voter who has been authenticated, has to have some means of voting. So some people like mail in ballots, and boy, I hate them. I think they're actually one of the least secure ways of voting. Why? Because we have no chain of custody here. It is the single easiest way to sell your vote. The reason being is that another person can be sitting at the coffee table with you, and that person can pay you money to fill out that ballot on your behalf. You sign it, mail it. No one will ever know. You can sell your vote. Super, super easy. The other thing is that the ballots can be intercepted and people can submit them. And people say, well, we have signature verification. Yeah, but that's not so good because the signatures on the breeder documents seldom are very useful. And also, too many are processed for that in practice to be very good. So, not very good mechanism. What about voting with your cell phone? Well, you can still sell your vote. We like mail in ballots. I guess we don't care about that. Signature verification can be replaced with biometrics. So if your identity system has a biometric fingerprint during the registration process, then at the very least, we know that it was actually Bob, not Alice, who was voting. But your phone can be hacked. That's the assertion of the paper that Ron Revist wrote with the other authors. I would say that's less of a concern with trusted execution environments. Every phone has one now, and there's unhackable software that you can put on that's pretty damn good, but still is a little problematic because the system is entirely digital. Okay, so what if we create a hybrid system? And this is not a new idea. In fact, this is a very, very old idea. And I'll introduce two things that one the Greeks did and one the Middle Ages that they used to do. So in the Greek times, they had this thing called the ostrakon. So it's usually a piece of pottery that was broken off a vase from an earthenware vessel. And ostraka refer to the sherds or even smaller pieces of stone, and they'd write something onto them. And actually, the term ostracize comes from this because what they would do is they would usually use this voting method, write a name on a person, and if you had more than 6,000 shards, the person would be exiled for 10 years. And actually, sometimes they'd use this to wipe their asses too with the person's name. So it must be somebody that really they got angry with. It's almost unforgeable because you know it's a legitimate piece because you can put the pot back together. And they generally have this concept called tally sticks. And they have this concept of a split tally. It's really ingenious. The split tally became a prevalent technique in medieval Europe, a time characterized by scarcity of coinage and widespread spread illiteracy. To document bilateral exchanges and debts, typically fashioned from square hazelwood, the stick was inscribed with a series of notches before being split lengthwise. Each party in the transaction retained one half of the marked stick, both pieces bearing identical records. Over the years, this method was refined to the point of becoming virtually impervious to tampering. One such refinement was to make the two halves of the stick of different lengths. The longer part was called the stock. So everyone wonder the word stocks come from. It was given to the stockholder, which had advanced money or other items to the receiver. The shorter end of the stick was called the foil and was given to the party which had received funds or goods. Using this technique, each of the parties had an identifiable record of the transaction. The natural irregularities in the surface of the tallies where they were split would mean that only the original two halves would fit back together perfectly. So, would verify that they were matching halves of the same transaction. If one party tried to unilaterally change the value of his half of the tally stick by adding more notches, the absence of these notches would be apparent on the other party's tally stick. The split tally was accepted as legal proof in medieval courts, and the Napoleonic Code still makes reference to the tally stick in Article 1333. Along with the Danube in the Switzerland, the tally is still used in the 20th century in rural economies. How about that? So it's pretty cool when you think about it. So why is this relevant? Well, you can create a voting tally stick concept using blockchain and paper ballots. So the basic idea is assuming that you have a secure identity system, assuming that you have a secure registration system, and assuming you have the ability to generate unforgeable paper and unforgeable blockchain, then what you can do is you can construct an election system where a person has two options. You can either vote with their phone using a special app running in the trusted execution environment of that phone, registered to a DID, that's their national ID. And when they do that, the record goes to a blockchain record, and it also produces a paper receipt. And that paper receipt can be treated like a tally stick. So basically, it's a piece of paper that is linked to that blockchain record and some property of the trusted execution environment, phone, and person. So it's linked to your DID plus hardware. And basically, that means that this tally stick, this component, this component, only these things can match together. And only this record can match together. So they all have to come together to prove that record. Now, the advantage here is if somebody tampers with something, like they break the blockchain, for example, and they somehow change the records, the tally papers here will not agree with the blockchain record. And let's say that somebody tries to tamper with the environment of the phone or other such things. There are ways you can build this scheme where we can detect an issue. For example, if it runs a trusted execution environment. So, what's nice about that is when you go to audit the election, you can count up the paper ballots and compare them to the blockchain ballots. And these are different indexes. They should match, just like a UTXO system where the inputs match the outputs. And then, if you want to be really, really, pushing, you can even create two paper ballots and have them physically linked to each other, meaning that one is connected to the other by the design of the paper, and you can mail that receipt to the person who voted on their phone. And if you want to go in the other direction, they could vote at a voting machine, or they can vote at a voting booth. And then when they vote with that, it creates a blockchain record, and they can check it on their phone through the registration. This is what's called a hybrid digital system. It's only as good, though, as your ability to authenticate Bob. So you have to have a strong ID system for Bob. Very strong. If you can't authenticate them, no good. And this is a distributed system. The blockchain lives in the cloud. The paper ballots would be held in different places. You'd have two independent sets of counters. The blockchain counts and the tally, stick concept paper receipt counts. As they count, they can even mail it back to people. So if you want to create a double paper system, you can for high priority elections. And you can even create two independent tally systems where the phones can preserve the records for a period of time in their local trusted execution environments, and they count it up, and then you have a blockchain record. So you can do a tally system if you want. Okay. Now, here's what's really cool. Bob can also query the blockchain, and as a result, Bob can verify that his vote was counted, and Bob can verify the entire integrity of the system. It has inclusive accountability because the application knows how many registered voters are there. And so you can check and say, well, if it was 1,000 people that registered and less than or equal to 1,000 voted, looks pretty good. And you can check your vote. And with the non-creds, you can check your vote, prove properties of how you voted without revealing your underlying name, for example, for voter registration purposes. So let's say a major party says to register as Republican, you had to have voted Republican in the last three elections or something, or only people voted Republican in the last three elections. You can prove that, but you don't have to reveal your name. All kinds of really cool things you can do. So, voting with a phone is inevitable. It will happen. And phones are super, super secure when you talk about the trust execution environments like Samsung Knox or these other things. And they're getting better all the time. And I think there's all kinds of cryptographic schemes that you can layer on with MPC or other things if you don't fully trust them. We have the identity primitive, we have the concept of a paper receipt, and we have the blockchain capability as well. So the answer is yes, I do believe that you can construct a secure system. The wiring of all of these things together is the hard part, and that's really where the value comes. But no state is uh, really above reproach unless they update and modernize their entire ID system. And what's really crazy to me is when I talk to people about a better national ID system, a lot of people say, well, that's the mark of the beast and it's dystopian and we can't allow a national ID. But then they're comfortable with social security cards and they're comfortable with driver's licenses and they're comfortable with passports and state issued IDs and these types of things. And there's the NSA and the CIA, and you put all your personal information on Facebook and you put all your personal information on Google. You use all these products. You have an Android phone, you have an Apple phone. They know so much more than what a government issued ID would have. So really, we have a huge vulnerability in our identity system. And because we have that vulnerability in the identity system, identity theft is a $50 billion a year business. And it's terrible for people that are subject to it. So, as a national conversation, you build these things in layers. And the first thing you do is you build a secure national ID system with programmable capabilities and portability that's self sovereign. So the DID standard is a really good starting point. We can figure something out with that. The next stage is then you talk about secure voter registration processes, assuming the DIDs, and then you can build up to a system that lets you vote with your phone, which will probably become the dominant way that people vote. And then it's very low cost to put a blockchain system and a paper ballot system there. And you can either have a single receipt or a dual receipt with the tally stick concept and you can send the tallies to people. And then actually, when we do an audit, what we could do is say, you have to keep your tallies and any votes that don't have a corresponding tally, either digitally or on paper, they won't be counted. You can build a system like that, put some accountability back on the voter, that they have to preserve that for audits. So there's a lot of ways you can skin this cat, but it's a very interesting field. There's a lot of moving pieces with it, and by no means is e-voting a easy topic. It's actually one of the most complicated of all cryptographic protocols because you are dealing with an intrinsically adversarial and intrinsically resource constrained environment and massive adversarial surface for it. So hard in practice to actually implement this, but this is a field of cryptography and it covers all parts of it: the confidentiality, the integrity, the non-repudiation, and authentication parts of cryptography. So it's a very hard information security puzzle. But blockchain does have something to play because it gives you a brokering mechanism for things to coordinate, gives you a place to put the digital receipt to match your paper receipt. In fact, as the paper receipt's generated, there can be a secret that's in the blockchain that can decode something on the paper receipt. So they're tethered in some way. And it gives you a place for your PKI for the registration of people that's tamper resistant, time stamped, and immutable. And you can even have nonces or other things that, as you're connecting to a secure voting thing, you can commit a secret, and the revelation of that commitment can reveal something. So it's a complicated thing, but in general, it can be designed. And a lot of good companies have been thinking about this, and there's a lot of good protocols around. And it's something we could build in probably 1 to 3 years with a dedicated team of about 5 to 10 cryptographers and engineers. And it is a system that could be built in a very low cost way because you create a application that runs in a trust execution environment. And then it's very easy to do registration. Literally just tap your phone. Everybody's got one of those, but we're not even going to consider doing it. We'll never bid on a deal unless we get to also talk about the identity infrastructure at the same time. Otherwise, you will be building the most secure counterfeit machine. There was a certain president that a lot of people, for some reason, doubted was born in the United States. And being born in the same place that that person was born and having a grandfather who was involved in delivering kids in that place, I always thought it was funny when people said this. They say, "Oh, we have indisputable evidence." Well, one of the things that used to happen in that place before Medicare and Medicaid is when people come over from various places and they have young kids, they just pay the doctors to fill out a birth certificate and submit it to the state and say they delivered a baby, and the state would say, "Oh, congratulations." The newspapers would report it, and the state would issue a birth certificate. Pretty cool, right? You come from the Philippines or Indonesia or some other place, and, now your kid's a US citizen. So, the problem with that is that the birth certificate's legitimate. State doesn't know any difference between the 2. Process was followed, documents were filed, has a signature on it, and there you go. You can't really change anything there. And only when people started tracking these things and they were looking for waste, fraud, and abuse did they, clean up the system a little bit, require more checks and balances. And the point is that systems operate in stages. And when systems operate in stages, every stage in the chain has to be secure in order for the end result to be secure. Just because you have a legitimate breeder document doesn't actually mean that the information in it is accurate. It's presupposed that the prior stage in the system was done correctly. So people make so much about one thing, and they say, "Well, this thing at the end must be illegitimate." It can be a completely legitimate document that was constructed properly. It's just garbage in, garbage out. Voting registration is the case study of that. If you have fake people or bad registration, you can't have a secure voting system. So you start with the voter ID, you have to have a good identity system, then a secure registration system, then and only then can you have a discussion about a secure election system. You can't go the other way around and start with a secure election system and then figure out how to do secure registration and then figure out how to do secure identity. You have to solve these problems in order or else everything goes to hell. So that I hope this elucidates a little bit for you guys, and gives you a sense of how deep this topic can be. And I would encourage you to have a little bit of skepticism when people say, "Well, we just vote with the blockchain, and that solves the entire problem." It is really hard in practice to build a system end to end that is secure. We did this with Cardano and SIP 1694 voting because you've already been authenticated. The people who are eligible to vote are ADA holders, and how you prove that is by proving you have ADA. That's a public private key system. It's the gold standard of identity. PGP is an example of that. It's a gold standard of it. Registration is done through the blockchain itself. So it's a secure registration system, it's a secure identity system, and there's no way to tamper with it outside of the system. So assuming your wallet is not compromised, can't really change the voting outcome of that. But it's a simpler thing than a physical reality. And a physical reality does require paper because there's people and all kinds of things. So you need a hybrid system and some concept of a tally stick to verify that when pieces come together, they can't be forged. And the good news is humanity has been doing this for over 3,000 years. In fact, tally sticks were also used in China over 2,000, 3,000 years ago. Gives you a sense of how widespread the concept is. So just something to think about, something to grok. Have a nice weekend, everybody. It's been a long week, but a fun one. Good night.